Good afternoon. On behalf of my colleagues here at the Federal Trade Commission, I'm happy to welcome you to our workshop on Smart TV, which is the final installment of the Fall Technology Series. My name is Kevin Moriarty, and I'm an attorney with the Division of Privacy and Identity Protection here at the Commission. And my co-organizer for today's workshop is Megan Cox, who's also in the Division of Privacy and Identity Protection.
In the 1980s, Congress recognized that consumer viewing habits were sensitive and passed two laws to protect them. In 1984, Congress enacted the Cable Privacy Act. Then in 1988, following the disclosure of Judge Robert Bork's video rental history by his local video shop to a reporter, some may remember this, Congress enacted the Video Privacy Protection Act. These statutes were drafted to apply to the media providers of the day, cable companies and video rental stores, and they required consumer consent before any of these entities could disclose personally identifiable viewing information. I hope panelists today will address the implications of these laws for smart TVs. So what is the role of the FTC here? One role is to highlight the benefits and risks of smart TVs, which is what we're doing here today. Another role for the FTC is to bring law enforcement actions against manufacturers of smart TVs that engage in unfair or deceptive practices. We've been watching this area since its infancy, and we've made clear that basic consumer protection principles apply just as they do to other sectors. For example, back in 2001, a U.S. Senator asked us, the FTC, to investigate the data practices of TiVo following a public report that raised concerns about the types and amount of information that TiVo boxes were collecting. In a letter to the senator, our then chairman, Potofsky, stated the collection of customers' TV viewing information in a manner that's personally identifiable could raise serious privacy concerns, especially if the practices are deceptively represented. The letter declined to take action, concluding that TiVo either received consent or collected and stored information in a manner that was not personally identifiable. More recently, in a comment to the FCC, we highlighted the FTC's potential role in preventing unfair or deceptive privacy practices in the set-top box marketplace. The FCC had proposed a rulemaking, I'm sure this crowd is very familiar with this, to require cable and satellite TV providers to allow access to their content by third-party set-top boxes. As part of its proposal, the FCC suggested requiring the third parties to commit to abide by the same statutory privacy requirements that apply to the cable and satellite companies. In our comment, FTC staff stated that if the set-top box companies made their commitments to the public, the FTC can enforce them under its authority to prevent deceptive practices, just as we enforce other commitments companies make to consumers. Now let me turn to today's terrific program. This afternoon, we'll explore the benefits and risks as the internet and television continue to merge, and we've got a number of top-flight panelists to help us do that.
So the potential benefits of smart TVs, Jessica mentioned some of these, and I think a lot of times they're pretty obvious. I mean, first and foremost, you get access to just an order of magnitude more content on a smart TV, including user-generated content on open platforms like YouTube and the web. I think this democratizing effect is good not just for consumers, but also for artists who have more opportunities to reach an audience at a larger screen format. Many smart entertainment devices also are developing interactive features to allow viewers to engage more with what they're watching. It can be voting in online polls, learning more about actors in a particular scene if you're curious. If you're like me and you miss a VH1 pop-up video, where they would occasionally insert little facts and snippets on the screen as you're watching, this could be a desirable thing. Personalized recommendations, if you watch and maybe rate things on a particular service, it can develop a knowledge base about you, may offer recommendations for shows or movies you might not otherwise have known about. And then these last two are kind of alternative options depending on how these platforms evolve. One, it may just be that people see fewer commercials on streaming applications. A lot of streaming services are paid today. There was a recent study saying that kids today actually watch 150 fewer hours of commercial because of relying on streaming content instead of Saturday morning cartoons. Alternatively, if the ecosystem does become more ad-supported like the web, perhaps consumers might start paying less for content. Or maybe there'll just be clear options that consumers can make a choice about what sort of experience they prefer. So the focus of a lot of today's workshop is going to be on some of the new ways that smart devices can collect and leverage consumer data. So this is a very high-level summary of some of the reasons that companies might want to take advantage of increased data collection. Some of them I think are fairly obvious, others maybe less so. Delivery is probably the most straightforward. When you ask a service to show you a movie, they're obviously going to be able to log the fact that they showed it to you. Research and product improvement. A service might want to know how you're navigating a menu to see if it's intuitive for consumers. Might want to learn why a device might crash, all in the name of making the service more efficient and work better. Measurement is a big potential reason for data collection. We're seeing new models for recording and reporting what content is being watched. This can be challenging as entertainment options get a lot more diverse. That's, I think, a good thing for consumers. But from a ratings perspective, when the offerings are more diffuse, it can be more challenging to get reliable ratings. Companies have engaged in targeted advertising online since the 90s, like Jessica was talking about. For a variety of reasons, development has been somewhat slower for television advertising. For at least a decade, we've been reading about press reports about bringing behavioral and other targeted ads to TV. We're starting to see some of that. I think we'll probably talk about that some in some of the panels. And then cross-device tracking. We'll talk about that a little more specifically later on.
So we are very excited to have a great panel of experts to weigh in on these issues. These are really, we're very, I think, lucky to have the actual folks that are thinking about these issues, that are doing the data collection, that are doing the using consumer data. And we are truly grateful that you guys have taken the time to come to the FTC to speak about your work. So I want to start, maybe we can just start with Mark at the end and have each of you introduce yourselves and talk about how your work relates to this area.
Thanks, Kevin. Mark Reeses. Up until end of November, I was head of strategy and business development for TiVo Research, which is a subsidiary of TiVo that specialized in working with set-top box data and using set-top box data and first and third-party data to improve the way television advertising is planned, bought, and measured. And I spent a total of 8 years at TiVo. So a lot of that was spent on interactive television, advertising, and other dimensions, but the last 3 was specifically focused on the data side.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashwin Navin, co-founder, CEO of Samba TV. We're a company headquartered in San Francisco with about 180 employees across 5 states of the U.S. and 4 countries outside the U.S. Our company is a software company. We develop applications for smart TV that provides content recommendations, content recognition. We're supported by advertising. We provide the service free to the consumer. Excited to share more details about what we do, both for consumers as well as for businesses.
We have, and Josh, you're from RentTrack, and ComScore is integrated into set-top boxes, and Ashwin, your ACR technology is integrated into smart TVs. So I thought the two of you could sort of give us that overview of the scope of the data that's being collected and the type of data that's being collected. Josh, do you want to start?
Sure. In the television business, set-top box data and now increasingly smart TV data has become sort of the census version or the census-style version. What I've often said is that if you were going to zero-base a TV measurement service today and say, how can I measure and report on television audiences today with no legacy? In other words, I'm not going to be burdened by the conventions of industry that have come before. Without question, you would begin that system with these census-style assets, with MVPD or cable satellite operator set-top box data, and increasingly with smart TV data. At ComScore, formerly RentTrack, we use set-top box data from about 22 million households around the country to create television audience ratings in each of the 210 DMAs, and then the 210 DMAs are additive, so we report on the total U.S. by summing up the audiences in the individual markets.
Great. Thank you.
I guess I thought it was a very, very good introduction. You know, the types of things that we see looking forward for the audience measurement business sort of predicates on the idea that samples, you know, are showing signs of weakness. Advertisers, you know, are finding it challenging to address an audience which is no longer consuming media the same way that they have in the past. A lot of the devices that we have available to us for consumption are you know, decidedly difficult to measure within a panel. For example, you know, we've observed that the audience for a primetime TV show that's watching the show outside of a television, on a mobile device, on a tablet, you know, could be as high as 25% for a popular primetime show, because the broadcaster has made a mobile app or a website available with those shows, or might have licensed that show to a third party for consumption. The audience might not be watching it live. In fact, most of the audience isn't watching it live, and the industry is built on a standard of consumption within a window of time. The audience for that show might be consuming that show for months after the broadcast. Also difficult for legacy measurement approaches to capture. And then it's really no secret that, you know, people really aren't paying attention to commercials that much anymore. While you're watching commercials, you've got the ability to do other things. You're multitasking, you're checking email, you're looking at the hashtag Smart TV FTC to see what people are saying about what's going on. That sort of division in your attention presents a lot of challenges to advertisers. And so one of the most sort of compelling things that our clients say about the analytics that Samba TV provides is that we're trying to describe the audience much more holistically. We're much more content-centric and not sort of governed by, you know, legacy, you know, arbitrary lines in the sand on when someone can be consuming something for the broadcaster to get credit for it.
And just to also give a little bit of color to this discussion with a couple examples. So on the set-top box side, and these data have been in the market for a little while now, with the operators starting to use it themselves, I mean, back in the 80s, you know. But it wasn't until really in the last 10 to 20 years that the technology has been upgraded, so more and more of them, you know, can do this. But for instance, in the New York market, extremely diverse. The panel that's operated for the Nielsen television measurement, that's the currency by which all the advertising is bought and sold and all the content is measured, has about 1,000 people in the New York market, I think. This is a market, you know, with like
Households, not people.
Yes, households. Sorry, 1,000 households. And then, you know, this is a market, you know, with like just 8 million people in the New York, the 5 boroughs of New York, and, you know, 20 million in the surrounding area. So basically the two providers, the set-top box, the cable providers, put their data together in the market and, you know, standardize the way they did it. And this is not an easy task also, I should say. And they discovered that over a third of the viewing was to non-English language channels not measured by Nielsen. And so you can really see the implications here for how we really don't understand the diversity of what's happening, you know, in terms of viewing across the country, and the kinds of content and the kinds of advertising that could be developed that's not being developed because it can't be measured and people don't know about it. So, you know, Cablevision, one of these providers, has 400 channels and 160 of them are measured by Nielsen. So you really start to see why this more census-based measurement, you know, is really critical in terms of, you know, getting an accurate representative picture of really what Americans are viewing.
Ashwin, can you just give us a little more sort of detail on how Samba is obviously not selling television, so how do people end up with Samba software in their house?
Yeah, good question. So we as I said before, we're a software company. We license our software to hardware companies who bundle the software with the hardware and sell that as a bundled product into the marketplace. Our software resides on that television latent until the TV is plugged in, connected to the internet, at which point consumers can activate it. It's not activated until a specific action of the consumer to opt in, to turning Samba on, at which point we can provide recommendations to the consumer based on past viewing behavior. That's our path to market. It is bundled with 9 different brands of TV manufacturers, brands like Sharp and Toshiba, are brands that are sold in the U.S., but they're also sold in Europe. They're sold in Asia, South America. We've seen traffic from many different countries. Our handling of data is informed mostly by European law, where there's fairly clear rules of the game, and we've done a lot of work to make sure that we believe we're in compliance with European data privacy rules. And that's been helpful because it's informed even our policy here in the United States.
So is the nature of how the software works to identify what's on, does that address the kind of problem that Jane just mentioned, which is the only 160 channels versus 400 available?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So we're because we're able to recognize content based on its visual characteristics, we can actually, increase the amount of content that we can recognize simply by increasing the size of our database of what we can recognize. Currently, we're focused on the most popular things on television, but we could, add, for us, that would be, the top several hundred channels in the U.S. But, in total, we're approaching 1,000 channels because we do this in other countries as well. On-demand programming are things that we try to recognize the most popular shows, things that may have been, are off the air. Friends, things like Friends, which are sort of those titles that are perennially popular even years after broadcast. We would like to be able to describe that audience for, both consumer recommendations, but also for the benefit of the media industry that, is measuring that audience for sponsorship. As the panel was set up, before we came on stage, the lines between television and digital, between TV and other devices is getting very blurry. You may start the experience on one device and continue it on a different device. The media industry has actually a pretty significant gap between digital and television. That exists within the media production and distribution business. It exists in the agency and sponsorship community. Teams are different, measurement is different, and that line is quite distinct. We think that needs to change. And what I think you may have read into Josh's statements earlier was that there's a bit of envy. The digital players want this sort of magnitude of media and advertising that's happening on television. Television is still primarily how the world is informed and how it's entertained, and by virtue of that gets maybe double the amount of sponsorship dollars if you exclude search compared to digital in the US and even more in other countries. And then the digital guys want to get a piece of that. But the TV guys now see digital coming, and they look at search and they look at social and different forms of sponsorship online, and they see the way that digital platforms sell advertising. They sell it on a performance basis. They say you only have to pay for what converts into traffic for your website or what converts into business for your product. And by virtue of that, their revenues are growing really fast. And so what I think the TV guys want to do is be able to position their TV advertising much more accurately. They want to be able to position it on an ROI basis so that advertisers feel like TV is a good investment and that they want to be able to justify the magnitude of those dollars.
Yeah, which gets to the census data, because if you can link these data across all platforms, and you can do it in a privacy compliant manner that works for everybody and provides a good experience for everyone, because obviously consumer experience is huge here. I mean, these media companies and these advertisers want to keep good connections with their consumers. So obviously the consumer experience is a major aspect of this. But if you can do all of that, the way the advertisers look at it, they would love to be able to plan their media, buy their media, and evaluate the return on their investment using the same data set across all platforms. It's not there yet. There's issues, but that's what they would love to see.
So just to shift gears a little bit, we'll accept the premise that it's good for consumers to have more efficient allocation of ad dollars. What what else do consumers get out of this increase in the amount of data that's being collected from smart TVs and set-top boxes? And this is really a question for anyone to answer.
Do we have any Arrested Development fans in the audience? A handful. Mindy Project. And these are shows that were canceled from broadcast television and picked up by companies that had better data. Mindy Project picked up by Hulu and Arrested Development by Netflix. And that's simply because they're looking at the content, they're looking at the popularity of those shows across a broader set of endpoints, devices, and saying, well, maybe the Nielsen ratings were low, but we think that there's a real business in having those shows. That's a clear benefit to the consumer. If there was better data, we'd have better programming, better investment, more conviction behind that investment. In speaking to our heritage as an app developer, what we decide to show first in a list of search results on a TV interface, or what we show first in a gallery of content that you can play, is entirely dependent on the quality of our data to recommend, shows that we think you might like. And the most stressful, it's funny, like I appreciate Josh's statement that I remember when I was a kid, you could find all the content on television by twisting a knob on their TV. It was all broadcasted over VHF or UHF, and today we've gone past scrolling through 500 channels, and now we have these search boxes. And I think that's the most stressful thing, is having to search with your thumb. It's actually quite a terrible experience. And
Type it in.
and typing with your thumb, it's quite annoying. And so, with data, you can start to get past that. You can start to, surface things that matter to people much quicker with less intervention through these clunky interfaces.
Yeah, the original use of data that TiVo had from its inception was actually to inform TiVo suggestions. So all the hard drive space on the TiVo boxes that wasn't utilized by recordings that the consumer set, the TiVo device would actually record things that it thought that the consumer would enjoy. And to many people's surprises, they found things that they didn't expect and very much enjoyed discovering and then become loyal fans of, because of the data that was used to analyze the recording pattern that folks set. So it was immediately a massive consumer benefit that it helped navigate this increasing, mass of choice without the consumer having to scroll through everything and, read TV Guide or its, successors and figure out what it is. It helped them figure out how to navigate this massive amount of choice. And I think the other dimension to it is something that Shaq mentioned earlier, which is as advertisers continue to have the need for television to reach their audiences and drive their businesses, with declining ratings, we've seen an increase in the commercial loads that networks pump into their programming. The commercial loads are now approaching, up to 18 minutes per hour, if not more. And I think that's, a horrible experience for the viewer to sit through that. And on converse, if you look at somebody like Hulu, they're peaking out at about 2, maybe 3 minutes from a commercial load, and they're able to do that because of the precision with which the ads are served. They're much more relevant. They're much more aligned with the viewer, and they control for the frequency. That is, you don't see the same thing over and over and over again. And I think from a consumer standpoint, use of data and improvement for the way that the ads are planned and bought and sold and in turn measured based on the return on the investment would ultimately lead to a reduction in commercials and improve the overall experience for the viewers.
So, Ashwin, you guys, you were saying that your software, you're integrated into a lot of different manufacturers' television. So you don't, well, tell me if this is wrong, but I would assume you don't own kind of the interface with the consumer. So, and how do you kind of address the fact that you're kind of working with different companies that have different ways that they might want to get a consumer on board?
It's a good question. I guess to address Shaq's point, there is I guess a price for a consent form that shows up on your television. It is jarring, but what's more jarring, I think, is if you show up to the U.S. Senate for a confirmation hearing and they know what you've rented from Blockbuster Video or something like that, not a price that I think a good number of Americans do care about that stuff, and I think they would like to have that disclosure. Although we don't make TVs and we don't own a TV platform, we insist that there's sufficient levels of disclosure. If a manufacturer wants to preload our software into their TV, we want to see that they're willing to take the steps necessary to make sure it's clear, that our software is there before it's activated, and that you have a clear choice to turn it on, and that the data will be handled by us with some care, and that if we aren't providing sufficient value to the consumer, that they have a very easy way to turn it off. That, I think, is table stakes. It may not be clear, in the U.S. in terms of, either rules that we've set as an industry or rules that we've set, as a country. But when you put yourself in the consumer's shoes, we just feel like that's just common sense. And, not only that, but if the data that's been collected in the past isn't providing value to me, then I should be able to clear that, not only from the TV manufacturer servers, but anyone else that may have it. In fact, we even go further and say that before that data can be passed to anyone else, there should be disclosure to the consumer at the time that that data becomes available to any third party and consent from the consumer. So that, I think, is table stakes to do business in Europe, and it's certainly what we expect of our partners in the TV manufacturing business when they want our software. And we've negotiated ways that appears within a screen that doesn't become too intrusive. Whether it's branded by the manufacturer or branded by us, we don't really care, but the core principles have to remain intact.
I agree with you. I just think that with notices, they can get a little bit complex, so you want to provide education to consumers, right, as a key goal, and make sure they understand what's happening, but too much information can be hard to process. And I've seen recently that ad blockers have started including blockers from EU cookie notices. So people just find that intrusive, so they're just blocking the notices altogether. I don't know. So that's a result we don't want either. We want people to just be aware.
Awareness is good, and we don't use jargon much. We try to avoid it. I have a jar on my desk for anyone that uses the word ACR. You have to put $1 in the jar. Because if you go to Best Buy, you go to Walmart or Costco, and you ask the average TV buyer, do you want the TV with ACR on it? I'm pretty sure most people say, what the heck are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Do you want a TV that's more personal, that makes it easier to find content, that's easier to navigate? Absolutely. And that's what we think is sort of also table stakes, for anyone in this business, is to figure out, what does this do for the consumer? What value you're providing, and how is that making your TV more attractive at Best Buy or Costco or Walmart? And if that's true, then there's other benefits from having a more accurate understanding of the consumer and the audience. But it's predicated on consumer value first and foremost, and consumer disclosure.
Yeah, and benefit too, because I have a pet peeve about that allowing your data to be collected. Opting in is like voting. That if you want to get good content, in this country, you've got to let people know what's being watched. So if you're just going to hide, then you will not. Your content will not be counted. Your content viewing will not be counted, and we can't help it if nobody makes any more content that you're going to like. So it's just kind of a pet peeve that I have about that. That I don't really think people understand. That they think when they are opting out that it's something having to do with the government or Jason Bourne or whoever it is, but they really don't understand that. There are benefits to having your voice counted.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, like, going back to the example that Jessica gave about the senator and the rental history. It wasn't the rental history itself that was the issue. It was that the senator's identity was revealed. To Jane's point, viewing information in itself, if it's completely depersonalized and anonymized, it is a consumer benefit. It informs, to a lot of the points Ashwin and others made on the panel, it helps the consumer experience in a tremendous way. I think it's the repersonalization and sort of letting the consumer identity be exposed that really is much more of the issue at hand, and I don't think the two should be lumped together. It's not the data, it's the person that really should be protected in the most strenuous way possible.
actually really glad this is happening, this workshop, and I appreciate the effort that went into it. We're really excited about television, about media, about what the power of data has for the experience for media and television. I use my app every day. I love what it does for me to help find something to watch, and I think that we not only need to do a better job as an industry to kind of clarify what are some guiding principles, but as an industry we need to develop a better sense of what this data does for the consumer and actually realize those. So part of the educational gap happens when we've provided sufficient value to the consumer that they don't feel like there's this unknown thing that could happen in the future, or that they're surprised when they find out that their TV is doing something. If it's something that they're immersed in and they actually get the benefit of it, then there's no surprise at all. And so we need to be more innovative. We can do more as an industry. I think it's helpful to have guidance, leadership. There is a sort of regulatory gap or vacuum that has, I think in recent years, or maybe in recent months, caused flare-ups in the press, and certainly in the legal environment, there's been some class action lawsuits that aren't helpful, that in fact, we as startups, as software companies, as innovators, hardware companies in this space actually benefit from clarity. Innovation, sometimes requires rules of the game. Actually, it definitely requires rules of the game. And, we need to quickly put those in place. So it's helpful to have the leadership of the FTC, and we appreciate that.